Hi everyone, I'm back again to continue some discussions about this time a very unique group of PVC figurines, something completely different as they say in Monty Python's Flying Circus. And now for something completely different. Uh, Today I will talk, as I said, about the PVC figurines of the European comic book characters, specifically French-Belgian ones. For the English-speaking audience, if you guys are not familiar with them, and I'm assuming some of you are, because some of these characters did show up in North America in the shape of cartoon series and some comic books and some DVDs as well. So I'll just show you in each video a particular set of characters from European comics. I will start today to talk about Lucky Luke, a poor lonesome cowboy who is far away from home, as his famous song goes that way. This is Lucky Luke. He is a cowboy who is faster than his shadow, and he has all sorts of adventures in a Wild West looking for bad guys to put him in prison, specifically the Dalton brothers, who are extremely aggressive and stupid. So Lucky Luke is always there to help those who need help and to put away the bad guys. He is molded here as a PVC figurine holding two guns, even though he actually always uses only one. And he has a specific type of revolver that he got from his uncle, who was working as an armorer. He made him a 7-shooter. So instead of a typical Wild West 6-shooter that has 6 bullets in it, his gun has 7. And that's how, in many cases, desperados and bad guys get a surprise of a lifetime when they run out of bullets, but he still has 1 left. He never kills his opponents. He does wound them if it's necessary, but most of the time he tries to outsmart them by simple small strategies that he employs. Sometimes he uses reverse psychology, but when there is a need for a gun, he will usually shoot the gun out of the bad guy's hands. And he has a loyal companion who also follows him everywhere he goes, and that would be his horse. Jolly Jumper is his name. The two of them go together and have adventures all over the Wild West. And the way their adventures are presented usually is that they have all sorts of serious, semi-comical adventures, because usually the citizens of every town and city he passes through, they're usually very cowardly when it comes to dealing with the bad guys, but sooner or later, with the help of Lucky Luke, they find bravery to stand up to the bad guys. On the other hand, his usual enemies are Dalton brothers, based on the Dalton brothers from the real life, who got massacred when they tried to rob a bank in Coffeyville, in their native city of Coffeyville in the United States at the end of 1800s. So the 4 Dalton brothers are based on them, so on the real life characters, except there is some differences in behavior and in the names. So there is also Billy the Kid showing up, and he's actually portrayed as a small spoiled brat who runs around with guns stealing lollipops and candies and money and things of that sort. And when Lucky Luke catches up to him, he usually gives him a spanking of a lifetime and then puts him into prison. Other characters he comes across is a famous French singer, Sarah Bernard, who was quite famous in the 19th century France. He comes across others such as Wyatt Earp, Jesse James and his brother Frank James. He comes across most of the famous outlaws of the Wild West who really did exist. And he also comes across Belle Starr, who was a woman desperado. He came across her as well and dealt with her too. And then he comes across General Custer, who is portrayed as a little dwarf with a inferior complex issue and rage problems. And then he also comes across Calamity Jane, a woman who really did exist in Wild West, who was behaving a lot like a man in her attire and in behavior, and she was able to handle a gun quite well. So yeah, he comes across all sorts of characters, good ones and bad ones, who really did exist. And this figurine has no articulation, nor does the Jolly Jumper. They're just made static in one particular pose, but Lucky Luke can ride on Jolly Jumper. If you can just put him like this, he can ride on the horse right there. Or you can display him without the horse, just side by side. These figurines are made by a company called Plastoy from France. They make a lot of memorabilia involving the French-Belgian comic book characters. Anything ranging from Smurfs, Lucky Luke, Marsupilami, Asterix and Obelix, and numerous others. And Lucky Luke is quite popular in a good portion of Europe, and of course in other parts of the world where the comic books and cartoon series were available. I have heard about Lucky Luke when I was a kid in my native country of Serbia. We had a lot of comic books of his that were translated into Serbian language, and I used to read about his adventures. And we were able to gain a couple of episodes of Lucky Luke cartoon series back in the 80s that was based on the comic books stories, and it was translated into Serbian as well, so I did see as a kid a couple of those episodes. I never had the figurines until a couple of years ago when I came across some online. So I did manage to obtain a few. So these are the first two. Then I also have Dalton brothers in their infamous outlaw green and black suits with gray hats. So this is Ariel. Ariel is the eldest of the brothers. He is not as aggressive as the other three, but he is usually slow-minded, not very bright, but not very nasty or mean either. He likes to eat. He's constantly hungry. He will devour a whole ham by himself without sharing with his brothers, and if he gets really desperate, he will eat grass. And he's always known to irritate the smallest and the youngest brother, who is the leader of the bunch, and that would be Joe Dalton. He always irritates him with some stupid comment, so that Joe always ends up punching him in the face and beating him a lot. So it's a very comical relation between the brothers, because usually they don't work really well together. But Ariel is there to take all the punishment when plans go wrong. But he's still a likable character, even though he's on the side of the bad guys. He usually doesn't put up much of a resistance when Lucky Luke apprehends them and puts them in prison. So that would be Ariel, and he's molded here to hold a giant ham on his shoulder. The next two brothers, and they are all going by height. Ariel is the tallest, and then William and Jack are the next ones. They're portrayed holding a sack of money and a cash register, because when they come to a certain city, they will rob everything in sight. Ariel is of course responsible to rob the restaurants because they have food, and he will rob the convenience stores, or how would they be called, the stores that sell canned goods and things of that sort. So each of the brothers will have a particular target to clean up. The two of them usually just listen to what Joe has to say, because supposedly he's the brain of the whole group, and they try to follow his plans to the letter. But something always happens that things go wrong, usually. So that's the William and Jack Dalton. And of course, the youngest and the meanest and the nastiest of the four is the small midgety Joe Dalton. He's portrayed here holding a handgun. He is very coarse in nature, has a very short fuse. He likes to mistreat his brothers, blaming them for his faults. And when he's sharing the money that they robbed, he usually keeps the largest portion of the money, giving his brothers measly leftovers, even though he didn't do a whole lot, but he likes to claim the biggest slice of the pie. And usually the mother of the Daltons claims that Joe reminds her a lot of their father, who was actually hanged because he was a bank robber and so forth. So their father was already hanged for his crimes. But the sons are trying to impress the mother by surviving any hanging and constantly escaping from prison in order to cause chaos all over again. People around Wild West are usually very scared of them, and Dalton brothers use that fear to spread carnage all over the Wild West. They usually never kill anybody, but they enjoy scaring peaceful citizens of every city and town. So the Daltons usually had appearance in majority of the cartoons made about Lucky Luke, and in the comic books especially. So before we move on to other media involving Lucky Luke, I'll show you the remaining figures. Now this funny looking dog with a huge nose is called Bushwhack in English. Bushwhack here has appeared in many of the comic books involving Dalton brothers, and he also showed up in practically every episode of Hanna-Barbera cartoon series about Lucky Luke, which was published in both English and French and several other languages from back in the 80s and had 2 seasons. He's pretty much like Avriel. He's very likable, but he's unfortunately very stupid, and he doesn't understand the simplest commands. He works as a guard dog in the same prison where Dalton brothers served their sentence, and he's usually tied by a chain to Joe Dalton's leg in order to keep an eye on them. But he likes Daltons because he's that stupid not to understand that they're bad guys. Joe Dalton immensely hates him, and he's always trying to get rid of him or to even kill him just to get rid of the dog permanently. But something always happens that Joe's attempts of killing this poor creature always fail. He usually joins Lucky Luke in chasing the Daltons, but he never understands that Lucky Luke is a good guy, and his mind is very slow, and he is, as I said, not very bright dog. He cannot even do the simplest tricks, or he cannot even trace any bad guys. He cannot do any of that as any other normal guard dog would be able to. But he's still very likable, and people usually cut him some slack, and Lucky Luke has an enormous understanding that this dog is very different from any other, and that practically just takes pity on him. Anyway, he's molded here also by the company Plastoy, and he's a bit oversized so that you can show exactly how he looks like, and he has a very big nose that is of little use to him. And the final figurine I have from this series is Mama Dalton, the mother of the 4 Dalton brothers. She is an elderly lady who lives alone with her cat Sweetie that she's holding in her arms, and her favorite is Avriel of all 4. She likes him a lot because he's always very polite, and he's willing to wash the dishes, clean the floor, and he's Mama's pet, Mama's boy. The other 3 Daltons are usually very jealous, and they dislike the idea that he gets all the attention and they don't get none. So Joe Dalton usually has an idea to win her over by robbing all the banks in the neighborhood, just to impress her. But usually she doesn't get impressed, to his dismay, and she ends up lecturing him. Of course, that is not to say that she's not criminally minded. Yes, she is. But when she takes over the leadership of the Daltons, they usually have clear idea and plans that cannot fail in order to spread terror throughout the Wild West and rob as many banks and trains as possible. When Lucky Luke tries to apprehend her in the comic books, she usually manages to escape together with her cat, leaving her sons to get arrested. But she does come to visit him in prison every now and then, or she sends him a package of bread that usually contains some tools to cut their chains with. So she's always trying to help them escape from prison, and she always expects they will pay her a visit before they go any further. And in the cartoon series, she does get apprehended together with her sons, unlike in the comics where she escapes. And then when she ends up in prison with her sons, she's wearing a prison suit and she's cooking lunch for all of them while they're breaking rocks in some penitentiary. So anyway, that's the last of the figurines I have from Lucky Luke series, the Mama Dalton. Now I'm going to show you some of the other things I have involving Lucky Luke at different other media. So let's start with some DVDs. This DVD is in French, and it covers one of the comic book stories that appeared before the cartoon, and it's called Daisy Town. That's a story where Lucky Luke comes to clean up a town called Daisy Town from all the bad guys and to establish peace and order. But then, unfortunately, the Dalton brothers come, and then chaos continues. But he manages to get rid of them as well. And Daltons, before they're sent in prison, manage to convince local native tribes to attack Daisy Town and destroy it. So Lucky Luke has to deal with the natives as well, and reason with them, and even fight with them in order to establish a permanent peace, which he does succeed by the end of the story. This particular DVD is from several years ago, and it's in French, so not in English. But since I already know the story, I watched this cartoon when I was a child in English, and in my not in English, with Serbian translations, then I'm able to understand it, even though I don't have an English version. I'm able to understand the story because I also read the comic book of the same title. So it's a pretty good cartoon. I highly recommend it. If you guys ever see it, it's worth taking a look at. It's very faithful to the source material. Now, several years later, more DVDs were released of the new adventures of Lucky Luke. And these DVDs would have up to 6 completely new adventures listed at the back here, where he deals again with completely new bad guys, and of course the Daltons, who are frequent bad guys to deal with. Now, the cover of the DVD is all in French, but the DVD itself inside is, all the episodes are available in English and French, so one can watch in either language. So there was about 48 of these new adventures, meaning episodes of the new adventures of Lucky Luke made, and they were supposed to be made, if I remember correctly, in Canada, in the province of Quebec. There are some good animators there, so because Quebec used to be centuries ago under France, so there is a strong influence of any French comics and cartoons in Quebec as well these days. So they made these episodes with updated animation, so they're quite good to look at. I'm not sure if they're being still published or are they still available, but again, highly recommended. There is no comic book versions of these adventures, so they're completely new. And then the final one, which is in English and French, which came out recently, would be the season 1 of the Hanna-Barbera original Lucky Luke cartoon series from the 80s. It comes with 26 episodes of the first season, and as I said, it's available in English and French, and there is a description of what kind of characters you can expect to see. So it's quite a good volume, especially because it's also in English, as I said. Now, the final memorabilia that I have regarding Lucky Luke, it would be comic books in 3 different languages. This is the French version of Billy the Kid versus Lucky Luke. And as you can tell, I'll try and get it closer. That's Billy the Kid, the little screaming kid. And Lucky Luke, when he captured him, he gave him a good spanking, while Jolly Jumper is laughing his butt off. And then we have other adventures, also in French. The Inheritance of Bushwhack. And the Dalton brothers are trying to kill him. They're dressed up as Chinamen. Now, in this story, Bushwhack inherited from a very old millionaire. He inherited all his property when the old man was going to die. He, for some reason, selected the dog to get his entire fortune. If something should happen to, in the story, if something should happen to Bushwhack, then Joe Dalton gets to keep all that money. So that's why the brothers are trying to kill Bushwhack and make it look like an accident so they can get all the fortune for themselves. Now, before I continue, I want to just emphasize that Lucky Luke and the characters were created by a French artist called Norris, and at first he worked on his own in the first initial comic book stories, and then later on he was joined by, and pardon my pronunciation, by another French artist called Goscinny. I believe that's the pronunciation. You guys can correct me if you know whom I'm talking about. Goscinny is also famous for the fact that he didn't just work on Lucky Luke adventures, he also worked on the adventures of Asterix the Gaul. So he worked with the creators on both comic books, suggesting storylines, I believe, and ideas and scenarios. And then another French version of the Lucky Luke stories that we have in French would be The Amnesia of the Dalton Brothers, where they, due to circumstances, lost their memory. And then Lucky Luke is trying to jog it again so that, see if they're really faking it or did they really lose their memory. Then another one that I have here is Tortillas for Daltons. And as you can tell, they're dressed up as mariachis. In this episode, the Daltons escaped to Mexico due to the circumstances, and they try to join a major gang of Mexican bandits in order to remain in Mexico and help rob the place, even though they're not familiar how things work in Mexico. And Lucky Luke, of course, goes over the border at the protest of Mexican embassy claiming that they're sick and tired of their own bad guys, they don't need to import foreign ones. In order to avoid any war between Mexico and US, Lucky Luke goes over the border to apprehend the Daltons and bring them back. And then another one here would be the secret treasure of the Daltons. They managed to hear from an old prisoner with whom they shared a cell. He practically told them in his sleep that he buried a great deal of money at a Red Rock Junction, which is in a particular town in Wild West, and that if he ever escapes, he will go and get that. Now, of course, the old man was lying because there was never any secret treasure, but he's willing to lie to them just to get rid of them and help them escape, because he cannot sleep even a little bit, because the Daltons are snoring a lot, and that bothers him. And Ariel, the eldest one, the eldest brother, he also snores and eats toasted bread in his sleep, which creates horrendous noise, and the old man is just sick of it. So he made up a story of the buried treasure just to get rid of them. Of course, the Daltons fell for that stupid trick, so they escaped, and they went straight for the Red Rock Junction trying to uncover that treasure, and then all sorts of silly things start happening, and Lucky Luke again goes after them. So that's that one. Now, I have 1 or 2 volumes of Lucky Luke published in my native language, which is Serbian, and this one is about Mother Dalton. That's how she looks in the comic book, very faithful to the figurine as well. And she's portrayed in her house with a picture of her sons on a wanted poster and a handgun that belonged to her husband. And of course, the cat Sweetie is helping her with her house chores. Now the final one, the final sample of the Lucky Luke comics that I will show you is that I have a few of them in English. You may have seen these in bookstores. This one is called Dalton City. And as you can tell, Lucky Luke bursts out of a cake that was meant for the Daltons in order to capture them single-handed. Dalton City practically revolves around the idea of an known desperado in the Wild West who was apprehended by Lucky Luke and defeated his entire army of the bad guys and shoved the guy in the prison. When the bad guy came to the prison, he was in the same prison where the Daltons were, and since he owned the city that Lucky Luke was responsible of clearing up and closing it down because it was attracting all sorts of scumbags and bad guys, he did that, and the city was permanently closed, so no desperado could ever go there, and no one should live there. When the Daltons heard of those stories, Joe Dalton got interested to escape and resurrect that city and call it Dalton City, where he would practically follow the same formula and the same idea of creating a biggest lawless city in the United States that would be for the bad guys and give them all sorts of food and entertainment as long as they spend their ill-gotten money in his bars and hotels and so forth. So the idea was good, but then again, as usual with the Daltons, something goes wrong. So Lucky Luke was there to speed things along and cause them to end up in prison again. So that would be my story for the Lucky Luke, the poor lonesome cowboy as he refers to himself. At the end of every adventure, he rides into the sunset with Jolly Jumper, and then he starts to sing that famous song, I'm a poor lonesome cowboy. Long, long way from home. So that would be that for now. In the next video I will continue talking about some more of characters that came from the French-Belgian comic book area. And that's about it for now. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.